Chapter 15 of Winning His Way by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15, in which Frank scores a beat on the Times and has another visit from Elsie Gray. From the fact that both Mr. Jebb and Mr. Robinson were undressed, and Frank Morris had found them in bed, it was evident that they had been chloroformed in their sleep. As the bedclothes had been set on fire, it seemed to be a clear case of attempted murder. The unconscious newspaper men were taken into the physician's office to be revived. By this time the fire department had turned a couple of streams on the burning section of the Neptune house, and before long the fire was under control. Frank Morris's heroic action in rescuing the two men from certain death was canvassed by a crowd of spectators who had gradually gathered in the neighborhood and passed from mouth to mouth. By degrees the knowledge of the condition of the rescued men spread, and of course this added an element of mystery to the affair. Neither Frank nor Dan said a word about what they had seen previous to the discovery of the fire. That the big man, whom Harwood maintained to be the counterpart of Squire Roach, was at the bottom of the crime was an opinion of both boys. "We can't do any good here," whispered Frank to his associate. Then, with the instinct of a born newspaper man, he added hurriedly, "We must get back to the office at once and get this story into the paper. We have just time to do it." The gas once more flared up in the editor's sanctum in the composing room of the Argus. "I'll leave you to get up a scarehead," said Frank, "while I get some copy under way." "All right," said Dan. "But first of all, give me a lift on the stone with this form. The story will go on the first page, of course." "Certainly," said Frank as Dan pushed the big chase toward him. The young editor gave his assistant the needed lift, and then hastened to get down to work, while Harwood seized a double-column stick and started to set up the sensational head that had been determined upon. Having finished this part of the work, he went inside and got the two pieces of copy already prepared by Frank, and soon the type was dropping with a click into his 13M stick. In half an hour Frank had finished the article and took up a stick, for he was a passable compositor himself, to help Dan out. The proof was pulled, read, and corrected, and the next thing was to get it into the form. While Harwood was unlocking the first page, which was divided from the 8th, which contained only advertisements and some plate matter, by a crossbar, Gibson the pressman came in. "You people seem to be behind this morning," he remarked with a grin. "Don't you believe it," replied Dan. "We finished up 2 hours ago. But there has been a fire at the Neptune house. You'll find the particulars in that proof. And having such a beat over the Times, of course we came back to work it into the paper." "Oh!" answered Gibson, taking up the proof slip and reading it. The new matter was gauged, and Frank indicated what to hold over and what to kill in order to make room for it. "You had quite an adventure, didn't you?" said Gibson, putting down the proof. "Seems to be a matter for the police. The big stranger you mentioned appears to be the guilty party." "That's what he is," said Dan as he lifted a handful of type into the form. There was a big run on the Argus that morning, in expectation of which Frank had ordered an extra-large edition to be printed, all of which was exhausted by noon. Everybody was talking about the fire at the Neptune house, and the murderous attempt upon the lives of the two newspaper men who boarded there. Mr. Jebb and his friend Robinson had been brought out of their stupor by the vigorous efforts of the physician, and they were an astonished pair of individuals when they came to realize the part they had played in the affair. "You both owe your lives to the pluck and cool-headedness of Frank Morris, the young editor of the Argus, who happened to be passing at the time the fire broke out. Since you seem to have no idea how you came to be in the condition in which you were found and rescued, it looks as if a great crime had been contemplated. Have you any enemy in town?" They shook their heads in answer to the doctor's question. Later on, when they read the Argus's account of the fire, and of the movements of the big, mysterious stranger seen by the boys descending from the window of their room, a strong suspicion as to the identity of the person occurred to each. By this time Frank had interviewed the police department of Green River. The town constables were notified to keep their eyes skinned for a big man in a shabby overcoat and soft felt hat. This was a rather vague description of the suspect, but it was the only clue they had to work on, for Morris did not consider it advisable to say that the big man resembled Squire Roach. Early that afternoon, Mr. Jebb and his friend Robinson, attired in borrowed garments, called at the office of the Argus and asked to see Frank Morris. "He hasn't put in an appearance yet," said Jinks, who was in temporary charge of the establishment. "He and the foreman were up all night." There was a big mail awaiting the young editor of the Argus when he arrived at the office at about 4 o'clock that afternoon. The number of 50-cent contributions coming in from all parts of the country, from persons whose interest had been excited by the $100 prize offered in connection with the story without a title, which had only been commenced the week before, was very encouraging. Frank had employed a special assistant to attend to his subscription department, as well as to perform other such duties as the growing demands of the paper required. The advertising columns of the Argus now showed that the young newspaper man had hustled to good advantage among the business firms of Green River. There was all the difference in the world between the Argus of today and the Argus of 3 months ago when Mr. Jebb was running things. While Frank was going through his mail, a visitor was announced, in the person of the dainty Miss Elsie Gray, who looked, if anything, prettier than ever in a new fall costume. "Dear me, Frank Morris, you're up to your eyes in business, aren't you?" she said, taking a seat by the side of the editorial desk. "I was up all night, and this is my first appearance at the office today. That's why all my work is ahead of me." "Then I'm afraid I have no business here taking up your time," she said demurely. "You're not disturbing me in the least, Miss Elsie. I possess the happy faculty of being able to work and talk at the same time." "Really?" she replied with a bewitching smile. "You are one of the most wonderful boys I have ever met. It is quite an honor to be acquainted with you." "I hope you're not quizzing me now, Miss Elsie," he said, smiling back at her. "Oh, dear, no, I wouldn't think of such a thing. Papa was speaking this morning of the remarkable improvements in the Argus since you took hold of it. He says it is altogether a different paper, fully as good as when your father was at his best." "That indeed is a very great compliment," said Frank, much gratified. "And might I ask your opinion, Miss Elsie? Your father is perhaps prejudiced in my favor on account of political benefits received from my father. Now your judgment ought to be disinterested." "I shouldn't like to express my opinion, lest it make you conceited." "Oh, come now, Miss Elsie," expostulated Frank. "That's right," she answered, flashing a half-mischievous, half-defiant glance at him. "Do you know what brought me here today?" "I didn't know but what you came to see me," hazarded Frank. "Did you indeed?" she replied coquettishly. "I came to enter my name on your subscription list for a 3 months' trial term." And she extended a silver $50 from her purse and tendered it to him. "I mean to try and win that $100 prize." "But, Miss Elsie, your father being a regular subscriber entitles any member of his family to compete in the contest." "I think I should prefer to have you accept my personal subscription," she said in a way which induced him to accept her money, and he pushed a blank toward her for her signature. "Are those all new subscriptions?" she asked, pointing to a pile of letters, many of which she had seen him open and take therefrom stamps, a few coins, and some money orders. "Yes." "Where do they all come from? Surely not from this neighborhood." "From all over the United States." Elsie expressed her astonishment, and Frank told her how he had advertised his prize offer in several of the largest circulated monthlies, and that these letters represented some of the results. The girl was very much impressed by his business sagacity, and, as a matter of course, he rose several degrees in her estimation. "I shall be at home Sunday night," she said as she rose to go, "and I shall be pleased to have you call." "It will give me great pleasure to accept your invitation," he answered with a glow of pleasure. She held her daintily gloved hand out to him as they parted at the outer door, and the gentle pressure of her fingers thrilled him as it had never done before. Certainly Frank Morris thought a great deal of Elsie Gray. End of chapter 15.